I am going to introduce today's speaker, Indra Naidu, who is the director of UNDP's Independent Evaluation Office. Mr. Naidu directed multiple offices of evaluation in his native South Africa before moving to UNDP, and he possesses a graduate degree in English and Education from the University of KwaZulu-Natal, and he holds a PhD in evaluation from University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. So I'd like to welcome Dr. Naidu to the stage and talk to us about can evaluations lead to change.
Greetings to the participants here and the participants across the globe who have got in on WebEx. It's an honor to be at Seton University and to provide this talk. We take our engagement, public engagements, very seriously as part of the way in which we advance knowledge and understanding on the work that we do. My talk today gets to a very fundamental question, as evaluation is the largest growing profession around the world, and is linked to issues of democracy and accountability, and which links to the broader question of how do you make the best of resources that you have. And I asked the question through a series of slides and points: can evaluations lead to change? And in terms of the outline, there's a few issues that I wish to touch upon. Firstly, why evaluation? Why are we going into this new multidisciplinary field? What is the scope of evaluation in 2015? What is UNDP, which is the EvalUwins, the organization which my office evaluates? Some talks around evaluation at UNDP, the network's evaluation questions, and then getting very practically from a research point of view, how do evaluators seek data? And the key issue, of course, for emerging evaluators, what are the tips that we would like to offer you in terms of who hires evaluators? At the end of the day, it comes down to, can this work, knowledge that I gain, lead to me getting gainful employment? And if I do, what are the opportunities and what is the nature of the work in that regard? The first issue in terms of why evaluation, it's really to understand what works and what does not. And it's a window to an organization. A window to an organization is evaluation. All organizations convey a narrative of its performance, but this tends to be self-reporting. And general self-reporting will not have full credibility because it's viewed as being biased. And the credible window to an organization remains evaluation, which links to the broader question of the three principles that govern evaluation: independence, credibility, and utility, the ICU triad, that actually work together in order to bring about the change and answer the question, what works and what does not. You are making a judgment when you do evaluation. Now, we're in an era where development involves working with scarce resources, declining resources, this global crisis across various parts. And how does one know what works and what doesn't? And evaluation can answer that question. So it is led by a certain methodology and a certain ideology that helps one to get as objective as is possible evidence on the surface in a transparent way that engages citizens, public stakeholders, so that there can be a democratic engagement in reflecting on whether one continues or refines or changes or closes down a program. And this operates at multiple levels, whether at a policy or at a programmatic or at a project level. Now, we're all committed to quality and feedback on performance, and that helps attain quality. So this is really about a broader discussion about the commitment to quality. Gone are the days when you could just produce because you had resources and activity meant you were hopefully achieving something. One could be busy and achieve nothing. And the only way you know whether the resources that are being expended have had the impact, the desired impact, the difference between the promise and the proof, is through evaluation. Hence, it needs to be independent. That's a fundamental principle of evaluation because it makes a judgment. It's also about assessing our activities and learning from them to inform future decisions. The key issue of evaluation is not just accountability and transparency. That's given. It's learning. Do you have a learning organization? And in order to learn, we need to see whether the results go back into the various trajectories for decision making in order to bring about programmatic change. Because ultimately, we would assume and agree that all of us want better programming and better quality. For learning to occur, of course, you need to have very robust and credible systems so that the findings are accepted and acted on. A key issue is whether there's action on recommendations. And the more it's in the public domain, the more you are likely to have action on recommendations. Otherwise, it will peter out and be another report that is written. And quite often, bad news in any organization is not something that is naturally shared. And a fundamental principle, of course, I mentioned is independence for purposes not of posturing or grandstanding, but independence for objectivity and impartiality. To conduct a credible evaluation, the evaluators need to access the full range of views, no matter how diverse they are, or no matter how conflictual they are. And if the evaluation unit is not perceived as being absolutely independent and credible, it will not get access. And if it does not get access, it will not get the information. By the same token, it needs to have the independent status in order to be able to present the results to the highest level. We always say in evaluation is about talking truth to power. Now, 2015 has been a busy year for all of us. Countless events across the globe, and this has been quite significant. It's been the International Year of Evaluation, which is recognized by a UN resolution. Evaluation is gaining recognition globally, whereas 20 years ago it was a word hardly used. Now in just about every country and continent there are huge evaluation associations. The profession has come of age. It's a real profession. It's gaining, apart from gaining recognition, it is now embedded a lot more in various ministries, in government departments, in civil society than ever was the case. And in the UN context of the MDGs, it's coming to an end in 2015, and this will be replaced by the Sustainable Development Goals, building towards the post-2015 agenda. There is more demand for evaluators currently globally than supply. It's become a niche profession because the impetus for getting results out and for proving relevance is higher than the supply. And of course, I'll talk about supply a little later because there's a whole debate and discussion on what are the requisite skills needed to be an evaluator. And program and policies put in place need to be assessed to achieve the SDGs by 2030. So 2 weeks ago, 100 countries gathered in Bangkok, and it was a joint conference between the International Development Evaluation Association, IDEAS, and the United Nations Development Programme. We had 450 odd participants who basically got together and very practically asked the question, now that you have the SDGs, what does it mean to evaluate it? How do you bring about the link between the communities, which are supposed to receive the benefit of a broad development agenda, and the implementers, which are the policy at multiple levels? And it was a significant event. It is on our website. Now the evaluant, the UNDP, United Nations Development Programme, the key operative word, of course, is development. And that is shown in terms of its global development network. 2014-2015, a budget of $10 billion. Works in 177 countries and territories. It supports capacity development to help partners find solutions to the development challenges. And areas of work are sustainable development pathways, inclusive and effective democratic governance, and resilience building. Those are the broad areas. And evaluation at UNDP, because it is critical to advance human development, it helps to achieve greater accountability and improved learning. And it is governed by an evaluation policy, which means that the office, the director, reports directly to the executive board on the function, compliance, quality coverage findings, and follow-up evaluations by UNDP, hence called Independent Evaluation Office. The I is a key issue of credibility. And it is quite consistent across the international systems where officers that report to the board have a particular policy. So really, the last point, independence, credibility, and utility are the triad that works together. Now, the world has evaluation networks. And development across the globe is evaluated through these networks. They are umbrella of evaluation units of all global investments and interventions. And largely, there are three big networks. the UNED, the United Nations Evaluation Group, that comprises the evaluation offices of over 40 agencies. Of course, they vary in size and budget. Then you have the OECD DAC network, which are the donor countries largely. And then you have the EFG, who are the international financial groups, the Evaluation Corporation Group. And these three networks, for the first time, came together 2 weeks ago in Bangkok and said, let's work together as an evaluation community and share our resources and lessons so we become a lot more effective. Because in evaluating the SDGs, it will not be done by either any of these alone, but it will be done by all collectively. The difference with the SDGs is for all countries. All countries are developing countries, as was mentioned. All countries have development challenges. So it's quite different from the MDG, which was much more contained. And of course, my office had evaluated it. You'll see the results. Now, let's get practical. Evaluation questions. An evaluation that I've chosen to focus on is the gender equality and women's empowerment, a critical area of work of the UNDP. And we set out, it took us a little over a year, to ask the right questions, and it shall lead to change. But really, to look at the new gender evaluation strategy, to incorporate our recommendations to lead to an improved policy. Gender, by any standard, is a difficult area to advance because of the socio-political context. And UNDP does have a gender intervention across its programmatic work across the globe. So this evaluation looked critically at the extent to which the various interventions were effective and those that were not, to make recommendations on how to improve them. An extremely important piece of work. And the key questions was the first one, the contribution. Has UNDP contributed to gender equality and women's empowerment development results? Secondly, we looked at the issue of integration. Has UNDP integrated the strategy across the programs, the policy, etc., during a period of 2008 to 2013? And the third fundamental question, the so what question. Having done this, having spent, did it lead to change? What are the change results? And we looked at where have UNDP institutional change results been the most and least successful, improving gender equality and empowerment in development results. But this was a huge study, global study, and we went across the globe. And we got data from various sources. We did country visits, 13. We visited 3 of the regional centers. There were questionnaires. We looked at the results generated by country reports. We looked at our own independent evaluations. 77 of our country-level evaluations were looked at and scrutinized to look at the gender dimension. And a huge database was put together, eventually leading us to a evaluation. You have both the full report and the illustrated summary that answers that question. Where has it gone well and where does it need to be improved? And what the evaluations of the IEO have, it has immediately after the recommendations, the management response. So the organization is extremely good in publicly putting right up front, this is what it's going to do. So for each of the recommendations, in the printed version, both the illustrated summary as well as the executive, the main report that goes into the international public domain, is clearly what are the findings, the conclusions, and the recommendations, and then management commits in public through the text what it's going to do by when. And that answers the question, is the organization a learning organization? And based on what we have found in this evaluation, the answer would be yes. Because when we conducted this evaluation, we looked back at the earlier evaluation on gender equality. And the first question we asked was, what was done, to what extent were the recommendations that were given then acted upon? And we found that all the recommendations were acted upon. So that's the key issue, because it's a journey and you always look at the past before moving forward. And of course, it showed that in many areas results were achieved, in many areas it was not. But in many cases, one needs to recognize that it was not within the power for UNDP to bring about some of those more complex social changes. So as an intervention in a very complex area, you cannot hold an organization fully accountable and responsible for areas where it does not have a grasp and control. However, the various interventions, and there are a multitude of interventions, whether it was helping improve democratic governance, whether it's helped to improve civil society, women's groupings, education, as was clearly shown in an evaluation of Afghanistan, the largest program, showed that cumulatively these were progressive interventions that helped, in a way, to deal with a very difficult social issue. And then the question we asked then, had it not been these interventions, what would you have had? And the evaluators have, in a way, suggested that it not being for that case, there would be less women's empowerment. It's quite critical that with scarce resources and difficult conditions, there were interventions that did lead to some change. The key question, of course, it's very difficult to measure how long these changes will be sustainable, because when funding goes down, the intervention goes down, and quite often what has taken a long period of time to build up can quite quickly be eroded. That's the nature of development. It's not linear, it's cyclical, it's start-stop. Which now comes to my final set of slides, career tips for emerging evaluators. The first one, any evaluator, before getting into the profession, you need your basic qualification to build your skills, to get the degree, to get accredited courses or training. There's multiple ways in which you could get training. Many universities now are developing curricula on evaluation. That was not the case 5 years ago. The largest training program for evaluators globally is called the International Program for Development Evaluation Training, the IPTED, which is now in its 13th year of operation. It's taught out of Canada. There's also a program in Shanghai called the SHIPTED. There's further programs that are offered across the globe. In essence, what it does is offer a core course and curriculum that looks at development evaluation, gets back to the basics, but moves a step beyond research. Because the difference with evaluation is that the research gets used for purposes to bring about policy change. Secondly, your own skills, communication, data collection, innovation, management, questionnaire, etc. fits back to the whole repository of basic research. The difference, again, is that evaluation operates, it's a technical process, but operates in a political context. You are asking some very fundamental questions about the program effectiveness, and you're likely to upset many people in doing so. Because evaluation, in presenting a judgment, does talk truth to power. And that means the skills that you have are not just technical skills, the skills that you have are also skills that need to be based on principles of ethics and guidelines. So the United Nations Evaluation Group, UNAIC, my professional association, has a whole set of norms and standards. In other words, rules of game for conducting evaluation that link to the broader principles of the United Nations: independence, credibility, respect, confidentiality, etc. But at the end of the day, you are presenting results. Find an M&E mentor and seek internship. I always advise, look at the various networks, follow, become a member of a professional association. The first question we ask anyone who applies to our office: are you a member of a professional association? And if they say no, they are unlikely to be taken, for the very simple reason, if you commit, you will pay something to get a journal so that you keep abreast of what are the trends, both academic as well as practical. Join an association. There's literally hundreds of associations across the globe. And of course, know your evaluant. Evaluation doesn't take place in a vacuum, and evaluators do specialize. You cannot just walk into any area if you don't know the context. So if you are moving into health, you need to know what the health sector is doing, etc., etc. That assumption that you will be very good if you know nothing about the sector is not true. You need to have a basic understanding of how the program works before you can appraise the program. And of course, who hires evaluators? The fundamental question. There's a growth of the M&E profession globally. You will see adverts all the time on all three networks, and you will find evaluators constantly moving between the networks in order to build up their skills. It's done both at the level of the international agencies, but also at the level of professionals, consultants, who become evaluators and build up the skills and get their accreditation. So they are hired. And there's a high demand for the use of good consultant evaluators to conduct the work. And of course, M&E professions, these are the people that employ them: British Council, US Justice Department, etc., etc. In the development field, evaluators who are willing to go to the field. All evaluators are not going to be head office. Many of them would have to go down to a project level. The key issue of any evaluation in a development context is working with the communities that's supposed to get the benefit. And it means participatory methodology. And of course, you've got UNAID, these are the various agencies, the UN, UN Women, UNICEF, UNFPA. All the agencies have an evaluation unit, larger or smaller. They work in terms of building up the skills and the reserve. And finally, evaluation can lead to change through policies and programs. Small steps lead to the big tree. It's not going to happen overnight. The evaluation programs in countries, all countries, and all countries are developing countries, takes time. They stop-start before they reach a stage of high evolution, where they reach a stage where they are in the constitution as a policy, where it becomes into the public domain, where the media uses it more actively. In many parts of the world, this is not possible, because transparency may not be appreciated, and bringing any bad news out into the public domain can be career limiting. So, despite this, the evaluators and evaluation professionals contribute as best they can. And 2 weeks ago, the Bangkok Declaration was accepted by the UNDP, the National Evaluation Conference Network, together with IDEAs. And it came up with a new set of principles, fundamentally talking about country ownership and using evaluation for bringing about social change, and once again, connecting communities that's supposed to receive the benefit with the decision makers in a way that really brings about greater democracy, transparency, accountability, and hopefully social change.
Would you like to take questions from any of the students here?
Sure.
The question is on what kind of sources of information the evaluation office provides. Do they carry out independent surveys, or they just use information given by governmental or non-governmental organizations?
Should I take a few questions?
Sure. You talked about the importance of question itself. So I was wondering if you can tell us more about the process of how the actual question is developed. You know, which words you decide to choose, what is the goal that you're trying to achieve with that question, things like that.
With regards to the post-2015 agenda, I know that evaluation is going to play a big role in member state evaluation, civil society evaluation. So where do you find the role of the Independent Evaluation Office in bridging that gap of confidence in member state evaluation and confidence in civil society evaluation? So it's not as one-sided on both ends, but more effective for people.
Thank you. Thanks for those questions. I'll take the three. The first one, the question in sources of information. We triangulate, but quite often triangulate means we don't totally specify what streams of information we use. But as a means towards adhering to the principles of good evaluation and also transparency, before we even start an evaluation, we prepare a concept note that we send to the evaluant management for comments. When we receive the comments, we go through another round before we develop the terms of reference. And in this engagement, that's very, very constructive and productive, you would find that more sources of information are offered to us than we originally had started out. Because programs are very complex and there's multiple dimensions that are needed before you make a judgment. It's very dangerous to make a judgment on a small sample or limited information because it has huge ramifications. So, given a program like the UNDP that is very global, it is important for us to cover as many countries as possible so that you have a meaningful sample. So on average now, with any of our thematic evaluations, we have about 30 or 40 countries that are covered. Now, that is more statistically useful. But then by the same token, the way in which the UNDP works in different parts of the world is quite different. So in the middle-income countries, its offering is very different as it is from the post-conflict countries. And that links to the sources of information. We really get together and try to work out that we have both a good balance between quantitative and qualitative information. There's a great danger if you only rely on interview data that you will speak to people that have already worked out what they're going to say to you, and then you are taking a perspective that is inadequate. You need the qualitative information, you need the interview data from the evaluant, which is largely the implementing agency. But more important, you need the perspective of the identified beneficiary. So if it's a community that is supposed to get the benefit, the bias needs to be from bottom up. Because we all know in any programmatic implementation, there's a discrepancy between the promise or intent and the actual detail in terms of what happens. And what evaluation does, it bridges the gap between what is said and what is done, answering the so what question. So the prejudice of evaluators, largely in a development context, should be biased towards the beneficiaries or those that's supposed to get the impact. And to measure the extent to which systematic thought leads to tangible change. If one is talking about the small grants program, the interventions to help communities in a very practical way generate some income from interventions that are small, one needs to look at the small grants program, not what the managers think about it. And we just completed a joint evaluation between the Global Environmental Facility Office, their independent evaluation office, and my independent evaluation office on the small grants programs across the globe. And we went and practically and empirically looked at it. And we found that whereas there were some areas that needed attention, in the main, this program had given real benefit to people on the ground. The benefit may not have been as grand as was thought, okay, because you're dealing with a great amount of variation. But there was enough of evidence to demonstrate that it had led to tangible changes. So quite often you find that in areas where you can measure more, the unit of analysis, where you can measure, which is the community or the program or the project, it's easier. It becomes more difficult to measure when you're talking about aspects like policy advice or a thing, because that tends not to be very tangible. But it does not mean it cannot be measured. So multiple sources of information, and we spend a lot of time very clearly describing in our methodology chapter exactly what we did and how we went about doing so. Obviously, respecting the confidentiality of people that give us the information, which is a given, it is still important for evaluators to be transparent in describing their evaluative processes. And in that regard, I also have an evaluation advisory panel made up of some of the top thinkers and academics in the world, whose job is simply to scrutinize the work of the office and give comments to me. And then they can independently tell the board what they think. So these are largely the thinkers and the academics. And they have given us a lot of advice and have helped to improve our work. The key issues that they were pointing out is exactly your question, right up front, that we were initially not using adequate sources of information. There were questions around sampling. There were questions around questionnaire design. How you ask the question influences what answer you get. Stratification, etc. And I'm very, very happy to know that through their critique, we have improved. Of course, it will continue process, and we will continue to ask them for more critique in order to improve it. To prevent conflict of interest, none of them are allowed to work in the UNDP. They get a sitting of us, a little stipend, and their job is to critique. And these are the people that run or written most of the books that you're going to read in evaluation. The second part is the question, fundamental, what are the questions? That takes a long time. Because from an independent point of view, you want to ask questions that are penetrating and that link directly to what is the key issue that the program purported to lay out. But every program does have a results framework. It does already have listed what it hopes to achieve, which makes it quite easy. So from that point of view, over the period of time, I wish to note that there's been greater amount of detailed specification on what the program intended outcomes and outputs are likely to be, which makes it easier for the evaluator to do. Evaluators evaluate against something, and it generally has to evaluate against what the program set out to do. It's very problematic for an evaluation, and evaluations do have the freedom to bring up these points, to measure or test what was not the intent. There will always be unintended consequences, but the question is, if that came about, was that part of the program? And there's many instances of that. Your third very important question, the post-2015 and the Bangkok conference. We recognize that getting the perspectives from government or from civil society on its own will be inadequate. Therefore, the partnership with the International Development Evaluation Association and with Eval Partners, which represents the civil society organizations, was important. Because if you're going to get a perspective only from the government perspective or only from the civil society perspective, it's inadequate. And we need to be very modest and recognize that it's going to be very complex and difficult moving ahead to come up with credible evaluation systems that answer the question whether the SDGs have brought about change and how they are measured at the various country level. UNDP has been given the responsibility to be a key player in the SDG agenda. It's central. Because it was the scorekeeper for the MDGs, it's central. But however, moving forward, it has to do so with the greatest amount of partnership. And the programmatic design of UNDP is going to recognize that a key development imperative moving forward is measuring SDG improvement in a way that it is country-owned, country-led, and is not seen as some top-down donor initiative on that. The Bangkok Declaration was very clear about national ownership, but it was also very clear about community and citizen perspective informing the evaluative discourse. Although it will be something that is stated on the top, but communities do not appreciate at the bottom, as often happens.
I work with somehow indirectly with UNDP. I was working with the Election Commission of Afghanistan, where UNDP Elect Project, Enhancing Legal Electoral Capacity for Tomorrow, funded an electoral capacity cycle for $175 million. We observed with our UNDP colleagues. There were like two models of implementing the projects: the direct implementation modality and the national implementation modality of the UNDP funding. My question is that why, when it comes to the national implementation modality, the UNDP funding projects, and even with their evaluation, which you see the reports and outcomes, it's more slow in terms of bureaucratic processing rather than the direct implementation modality. I know that when it's direct, more internationals and UNDP staff is involved and the process is fast. But when you're funding a government or maybe an organization or agency, a domestic agency in a country, you need to empower the partner. But that empowerment, you see an obstacle of slowdown of the process. I was wondering that in your own evaluation reports, where the problem actually lay down, what's the source of this slowdown of the project when you come from them to NEM?
Thank you for that question. I was personally involved in that evaluation. We call it the Assessment of Development Results of Afghanistan, which we completed in 2013, led by a very seasoned evaluator from my office, Olivier Cousset, and it took us quite a long time to do. And the various projects that were listed, it was an important evaluation because 17% of budget of UNDP goes to Afghanistan. So we took it very seriously and we presented the results in Kabul on 2 occasions, and we also debriefed all the various donors, the civil society, the missionaries on those occasions. It was complex and a difficult evaluation to do, to get data. And in the section where we looked at the ELECT program, we had raised issues around exactly the question of the speed point. But one of the challenges that you have of an international agency working in a country with a government is that it has to work via the systems of government, hence the national implementation modality. And sometimes it slows it down, and I think we even pointed out in the evaluation where the challenges were. But also, it's not necessarily the case in all programs, in all projects within a country portfolio, that depending on the modality, the speed is affected. Because the way the intervention is laid out, in some cases it's through officials, in other cases it's with local government, in other cases it's with third parties. And that all becomes very complex when you actually roll out the entire area. We would have to look again at, there were very clear and strong recommendations made in that particular evaluation. And we'd have to look at the extent to which there's been progress along that. But an evaluation is also a snapshot, not a motion picture. So whereas we caught the picture there at the time and presented it, from the time we completed that till now, much has changed in Afghanistan, which further complicates the way in which the funding that goes in is going to be effective. It's a very dynamic situation. We kept on pointing out in the evaluation that situations were dynamic, they were changing, they were evolving, sometimes in a way that was positive, in other times that was not so. So within the complexity of the political negotiations and the transitions and the modalities and the change in the regime, etc., the question links to the issue of the sustainability of the intervention. At that time, we had found that many of the programs had reached a level of sustainability, largely the ones around gender, with, for the first time, girls in schools, which was a huge progress from where it was. But we also pointed out that should the support for the gender advancement not continue and the funding not continue, it is quite easy for these gains to be lost in a short period of time. And I think if you read the media, some of that has happened. It goes back to any evaluation has 4 questions: relevance, efficiency, effectiveness, and sustainability. On the relevance, most programs score well. They're relevant, they're going in, they're meeting a need. On the efficiency, sometimes it fluctuates because the cost of doing business in difficult countries is much higher than you would in a normal situation. The effectiveness, we ask the question is, to what extent has this funding been used optimally? And we are able to answer it as best we can. We evaluators are not auditors, so we largely are drawing on other data for that. But when it comes to the sustainability, there's almost an assumption that the development agency has done well when it leaves. But sometimes when it leaves, that is the end of the program. Because it is not that the capacity exists in various countries to continue and move ahead with the program. Sometimes it's going to take many years and it will just become normal and continue. It may never be upstream. It may continue to remain at a project level. So there needs to be a bit of caution when using the word sustainability, almost like handing over the baton to the next, and it's sustainable when the intervention is out. And it's fragile. The gains are internationally fragile in the development context, especially in that one. If I were to read that evaluation again and look at what we said, I may have a very different perspective now, a year and a half later, than what I did previously. It was time-bound. What we caught there. Because too many things change too quickly in the period of time. It would be, we would know when we go and do the next evaluation in 2 years to what extent more has been gained or some has been lost. So any evaluation that we have, it's good to look at it over the series. We do it once for 4 years. Every country gets evaluated once in the 4-year cycle. And so we look at it. In some cases, there's improvement. In other cases, it declines.
Question for the webinar here. Can we go into evaluation without studying evaluation as a main degree? And secondly, can you tell us about any negative feedback you had to give and how you were able to handle some kind of two-parter?
Sure. Okay, on the first question, most evaluators do not start off with a professional evaluation degree because those are only coming up now, and generally they're at the postgraduate level. So everyone would need the basic qualification, an undergraduate, a postgraduate degree. Which degrees count? Hard to say. The evaluators in my office come from multidiscipline and multiple areas. But largely in the social sciences, or understanding data and understanding international politics is useful. And I have found that in my office, the more diverse the team, the better we are. Because when you work, and we work as teams doing evaluation, we always come together at multiple levels, those perspectives are extremely critical. So I would say no, you don't need to go in straight to, it's a bit of a luxury. Definitely not in my time. There were no evaluation degrees when I started this work 2 decades ago. But more recently, there are courses that are offered where you go in and straight away you know in 4 years you can come out with enough of a skill to be an evaluator, but no experience to be taken seriously. Because the big thing that counts in evaluation is experience and the number of evaluations that you've done. Your flying hours, as I call it. So sometimes people come and get very frustrated that they do not get a high-level post. And in an evaluation office, you tend to start at the bottom and move up. You have to be mentored before going, because it's a skill that comes not just with the academic qualification, but really with the experience and the being bashed in the field, as I would say. Which links to the next question, giving negative feedback. That's what I do all the time. And one needs to be as empathetic as possible to provide the feedback in a way that it resonates with the broader ethos that we all are together in trying to bring about programmatic improvements. We are separate in the sense that none of us can judge ourselves, hence the independence issue. So the language that is used and the way results are presented needs to be strategic but not euphemistic. In some areas, you are going to say things fairly hard. In other areas, you're going to say things in a way that is much more constructive. It is possible, using language, to constructively convey messages. But you also need evaluation champions. If there is no receptiveness on key leadership, on accepting critique, whether at a project, country, or whatever level, you are likely to have a problem because some and many see evaluation as a threat to funding. Any negative news and the program will close down. The truth be told, the international community that puts in funding does not expect perfect results all the time. What they do expect is a recognition that a program has strengths and challenges. And they are more interested in, so what is going to be done. It's for that reason, in the last 3 years, all evaluations from my office have the management responses right up front in the beginning of the report, which is a clear indication to everyone that we are working together in terms of finding and recommendation, and it's a demonstration of transparency. So we use many techniques in terms of presenting findings, but a way to help is to use more participatory methodology, ensuring, of course, you still keep on the basis of principles. That notion, an evaluator comes in, asks a few questions, goes away, and a few months later an evaluation lands on someone's desk, is dangerous. Because it does not build capacity, it does not build confidence, it causes mistrust. And the way to do so is to clearly stipulate the number of steps of engagement and to explicitly say so. So most of our evaluations have many engagements with the evaluant. Right? You have your concept note, you have your terms of reference, you have your first draft, your second draft, your workshop, your finalization, and there will always be a degree of negotiation. There will always be influence, both positive and negative. That is not a problem. That goes with the turf. What is important to recognize is that often the perspectives that are brought in are these perspectives that are based on evidence. If there is new evidence, it must be considered. And evaluators must not be dogmatic to discount it. By the same token, if there is no evidence to back a claim, the evaluators are obliged in terms of the professional ethics to give the judgment as it is. And I would just invite you to read our evaluations, the last 3 or 4 thematics, and you can see that it's been largely constructive. It's also totally fine for the evaluant, the organization, to say, I disagree with this recommendation. There's no problem in that. In fact, that's a sign of good democracy. But then they need to say why they disagree. And it's not the job of the evaluator to go back and say, no, you have to agree. That's also fine. Many agencies have a 60-70% of agreement. Everything doesn't have to be 100%. It's pointless having the management have 100% agreement and do nothing about it thereafter. So you want this engagement. It's part of a healthy debate. It's a critical function. It's not a function that's necessarily liked, but it's a function that is necessary. So it's not antagonistic, but it does create a healthy organizational tension, because only when you have someone asking hard and tough questions can you bring evidence to the surface. Otherwise, what you have is everyone believing the ideology. And it's more and more difficult in this day and age for negative news to be suppressed because of social media. So an evaluation that goes and says all is well, and then a program blows up, is really bad news on it. So evaluators are also competing in terms of the narrative that is coming through with multiple streams of information. They don't hold full command of. Their job is to do work that is high quality, ethical, credible, with full engagement in order to try and bring about programmatic improvement. That is the end game. The end game is not having red faces. It's to bring about programmatic improvement. The rest that comes will obviously be peripheral.
All right, wonderful. So this is a great note for us to wrap up on. This is a note of empowerment. This is a note of engagement. And so I'd like to thank Dr. Nadeau for his time and patience in coming out and talking with us today. Thank you so very much. Thank you.